Why were they all staring at her? Like grief had a uniform and she was wearing the wrong one. The rows seemed endless. 89 flag-draped coffins lined the pale Arlington sky, each one a fragment of silence too heavy for words. The wind carried prayers, names, guilt, a language only the broken could understand. Soldiers stood at attention, but their hearts were somewhere between the bugle's cry and the graves. Families wept without sound. And through it all, one figure stood alone, still as the marble behind her. Sergeant Riley Cole. No ribbons, no salute, just a quiet woman with the weight of 89 names pressed against her chest like a second set of dog tags. Someone behind her whispered, "They say she was supposed to stop it." Another voice, low and sharp, "Someone gotta answer for this." She didn't turn, didn't blink. The world could accuse her all it wanted. She was done explaining what silence already knew. Her phone buzzed once. She looked down, 2 words. Sentinel HQ. Riley slid the device into her pocket, straightened her cap, and took one last look at the line of flags stretching into the horizon. Then she walked away, not from the dead, but toward whatever waited in the shadows that kept making more of them. The elevator inside Task Force Sentinel whispered upward, stainless steel walls reflecting a woman who didn't belong anywhere but the mission. 32 years old, former sniper, 2nd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment, a veteran of more ghosts than medals, the kind of soldier who measured breath before movement, because breath could get you killed if you took it at the wrong time. She turned the brass coin in her palm, her father's sniper coin, the one thing that survived him. Major Daniel Cole, Laos, 1983, officially lost in operation. Unofficially, something no one talked about. Riley had grown up tracing the coin's edges, wondering what her father saw in his final moments. And now, decades later, the same men who'd served with him were calling her back. The elevator stopped with a hiss. The doors opened onto a corridor of white light. Task Force Sentinel wasn't just another command. It was the Pentagon's quiet admission that some problems were too strange, too delicate, too deadly for headlines. Colonel Marcus Harlan was waiting in the bunker-like briefing room. He was older now, but his posture still carried the gravity of command. Behind him, digital maps pulsed with red markers scattered across the Rockies. He didn't waste words. "Good to see you again, Riley. I wish it were under better circumstances." He tapped the tablet and the screen changed Montana, littered with coordinates. 6 weeks, he said. 89 dead, single-round headshots, no survivors, no signatures. Someone in the room shifted uneasily. Harlan zoomed in. "We recovered match-grade Russian brass. Whoever's doing this isn't hunting for sport, they're testing us." A murmur rippled across the table. The hum of electronics filled the gaps where courage didn't. Then Harlan said it. "We've identified the unit. XKGB Sniper Cell. Valky's Eye, all female, they work in trios, vanish before the body hits the ground." Riley studied the pattern. Calm, controlled. "Extreme range engagements," she murmured. "Over 2,000 meters. They're using thermal optics. Suppress .338 Lapuas. That's not improvisation, that's doctrine." A man across the table, Major Ethan Briggs, leaned back, smirking. "Doctrine? Come on, Colonel. You're saying one woman can take out a kill team trained to disappear. We've got drones and satellites that can't even find them." A few officers chuckled. Riley didn't look at him. She just stared at the glowing map, one red marker brighter than the rest. Coordinates on the northern ridge. She knew those numbers. She'd memorized them before she was old enough to know why. Her father's last mission zone. Harlan noticed her eyes on the map. "That's right," he said quietly. "Your father's last op. His team never made it out. You're the only living sniper who's faced this kind of enemy and survived. That's why you're here." Briggs chuckled, or maybe she just got lucky. Riley looked up slowly. Her voice was even. "There's no such thing as luck, Major. only distance and discipline. The laughter died like a bad habit. When the briefing ended, she stayed behind. Everyone else filed out, leaving her with the cold glow of red dots on the wall. Snow drifted outside the window, small, deliberate flakes falling over the mountains like ash. She closed her hand around the coin again, feeling its smooth edges bite against her palm. A memory flickered. Kandahar, years ago. A hill of dust. A wind she couldn't see but could feel in her bones. Her father's voice in her head. One breath, one shot. Back in the present, she exhaled. The room seemed smaller now, quieter, heavier. Harlan's voice still echoed somewhere behind her eyes. 89 dead. She wasn't going to let there be 90. The next morning, the firing range was an open wound of cold metal and white floodlights. Briggs was there, predictably, hands in pockets, grin already half-loaded. Around him, a crowd of officers, technicians, and a few contractors with tablet cameras, ready for the show. They handed Riley an M2010 sniper rifle, regulation issue, stripped of comfort, tuned to baseline. It felt right, like meeting an old friend who'd seen you at your worst and still recognized you. Blindfold, Briggs said, too loud. Let's see if the legend still breathes. The crowd chuckled again. She nodded. A black cloth went over her eyes, thick enough to erase light, thin enough to let the air through. Most people panic in that kind of darkness. Riley found peace there. She could hear her heartbeat, the creak of her gloves, the weight of metal waiting to be built. Hands moved like choreography. Magazine, bolt, safety, scope alignment, every click a heartbeat, every motion the echo of 1,000 repetitions. 80 seconds was the limit. She finished in 63. When the blindfold came off, she blinked once against the light and looked at Briggs. He smirked for the cameras. All right, Sergeant, show us the myth. Targets were set, 200 to 1,000 meters. She adjusted for wind, barometric pressure, temperature, and a faint cross-draft pulling left to right. The data danced quietly in her mind, numbers most people found boring, but for her, they were poetry. Elevation, she whispered, 1.8 mils. The first shot broke the silence. Then another, then another. Each round landed clean, precise, tight clusters, bullseyes that looked printed, not shot. 40 rounds, 40 kills. The laughter was gone. Someone exhaled a low whistle. Riley looked up. Coin, she said softly. Briggs frowned. What? She held out her hand. Coin. They handed her a brass coin. She balanced it on the edge of the target stand, a sliver of impossible. She didn't breathe for the next 5 seconds. One shot. The coin split clean in half. Half fell, half stayed. Silence rippled through the range. No clapping, no words, just the echo of truth. Briggs swallowed hard. That's not a trick, he muttered. Riley didn't smile. She simply lowered the rifle, cleaned the barrel, and let the silence do the talking. In the briefing room later, Harlan spoke again. Valky's eye moves like math, but math can be broken if you think like a hunter, not a spreadsheet. We need someone who knows the hunt. Briggs crossed his arms. We've got protocols, drones, counter-sniper teams. Harlan cut him off. And every one of them got killed. We need instinct, not theory. He looked at Riley. You're not here for show. You're here because you survived what they are, because you think in the silence they live in. The room went still. Riley's voice was quiet, steady. Permission to hunt. It wasn't a boast, it was a promise. Harlan nodded. Permission granted. That night she packed alone. Rifle, optics, maps, one photograph, her father, Colonel Harlan, and a younger version of herself between them, his hand on her shoulder, the sun bright behind their smiles. She traced the faces. The coin lay next to it, warm from her palm. Outside, the Rockies waited, cold, vast, and whispering through pine. Somewhere up there, the women of Valky's eye were watching too. The question wasn't if they'd find each other. It was who was hunting who now. Why did the road feel emptier than the sky? The convoy rolled out before dawn, tires whispering over frozen asphalt that curved through the Rockies like a scar. Trucks carried crates of silence, rations, fuel, intel packets, and one woman who hadn't slept. Riley sat in the lead vehicle, elbow against the window, eyes reading the horizon the way snipers read a heartbeat. Steady, suspicious, unwilling to trust the calm. Snow clouds hung low, fat with promise. The driver, a corporal too young to hide his curiosity, kept sneaking glances. "You really took out that coin, ma'am, blindfolded." She didn't answer. He cleared his throat, embarrassed. "Just heard stories." "Stories are for people who weren't there," she said quietly. The conversation ended where most of hers did, in the long distance between question and truth. By midday the convoy split. Two trucks peeled east toward a decoy route. One continued north with Riley's gear. Sentinel had disguised her deployment as a logistics drop. No public records, no chatter. Only a line in an encrypted manifest. Cole R. Field Observer. The corporal pulled over near a snow-choked access road. "This your stop?" Riley checked her map, then the mountains stacked above them. "This is where the noise ends." She climbed out, slung her duffel, and tapped the roof twice, a quiet thank you disguised as habit. The truck idled a moment, then vanished into the white distance. Silence returned, vast and unbothered. She started walking. Each step bit through crusted snow. Pines stood like sentries, watching. The air smelled of metal and resin, the scent of things that have learned endurance. 2 hours later she reached a cabin clinging to the mountainside, half swallowed by drifts and time. It wasn't much: tin roof, single stove, one room large enough for plans and ghosts. She set down her pack, pulled the tarp from her pelican case, and opened it. The rifle waited inside like truth waiting for confession. She cleaned it by ritual: bore, bolt, lugs, oil. Her hands moved without needing thought. When she finished, she looked at the photo again, her father's hand on her shoulder, Colonel Harlan's grin from another lifetime. She placed it on the table beside the coin. The two pieces of metal caught the firelight differently, one polished by years, the other dulled by duty. She poured black coffee into a tin mug and let the steam hide her expression. Outside, wind combed the ridge. Somewhere, the women she'd come to find were likely doing the same, preparing, watching, breathing. She whispered to the empty room, "If you're out there, I'm already listening." At 200 hours she woke, no alarm needed. Habit had its own clock. Outside, the world glowed faintly blue. Moonlight made snow look like ocean. She moved through it slow, light-footed, carrying the rifle like an extension of pulse. Her secondary hide was nothing more than a hollow behind a fallen log, camouflaged with pine boughs. She slid in, belly to the earth, cheek to the stock. The glass of the scope filled with the valley's breath, mist rising, tree shadows shifting. Hours passed. Most people think sniping is about shooting. It is. It's about waiting. It's about letting time slow until it breaks. By 300 hours, the wind shifted. A new current brushed her cheek, faint, deliberate. She felt it before she heard it, a vibration under the soil, a rhythm not made by nature. Footfalls. She adjusted the scope an inch. There a glint, faint, low in the timber, no brighter than a dewdrop, too regular for frost, too patient for chance. Another higher. Riley's heartbeat didn't speed, it steadied. 2 glints meant 2 shooters. Doctrine said Valky's eye moved in 3s. She whispered into her mic, voice barely breath. "Contact possible, East Ridge." No response. She wasn't expecting one. Sentinel was holding comms dark unless she called green. She scribbled notes in her field pad. Glass East 3007. Disciplined, multiple. Then she waited again. The snow fell softer now, mooting everything but intent. She could feel them watching, professionals, patient as she was, maybe more. If they knew she was here, this was no ambush. It was a mirror. And mirrors never lie. They only return what you bring to them. She exhaled once, slid backward inch by inch, and melted into the trees. By dawn, the cabin was warm again. She wrote her findings on the map, tracing lines between ridges, choke points, and escape routes. The red grease pencil turned the landscape into a living thing, arteries and nerves drawn in wax. Her gaze fell on one particular set of coordinates, a sequence she'd seen before, hidden in her father's service file. His last mission. Same terrain, same ridge system. The realization settled like cold water through her spine. She reached into her jacket and pulled out the evidence bag Sentinel had given her before departure, a single brass casing recovered from one of the ambush sites. She held it to the light. Something was etched along the side, faint Cyrillic letters scratched by a steady hand. She mouthed them slowly, the old Russian surfacing from memory. Hunter's sister. She stared at it until the meaning crawled fully into the room. Not a taunt, a signature. A message meant only for her. The stove cracked, sending sparks upward. Riley turned the casing in her fingers, imagining the woman who'd carved it. Was she laughing, mourning, or making peace with a truth neither flag could claim? She set the casing beside the coin. 2 pieces of metal, 2 histories. Outside, daylight came thin and silver. At 1400 hours, the radio hissed. Colonel Harlan's voice, quiet and cautious. We're holding the convoy until you call it. Your window, your weather. Riley kept her voice level. Copy, hold position. Riley, he hesitated. If they're baiting you, don't bite. I won't, she lied. When the channel went dead, she stared at the radio until it looked like a confession booth. She turned it off. That night the wind died early, never a good sign. The forest felt expectant. Even the animals had gone quiet. At 300 hours she returned to the hide. This time she didn't need to search. The mountain felt crowded. Movement flickered along the eastern spur, 1,200 meters out. 2 silhouettes moving with the same discipline she'd seen in the briefings. Wedge formation. Calm, confident. They set up behind natural cover, rifles angled toward the road below, a perfect killing lane. Too perfect. Riley's instinct whispered what experience confirmed. Decoys. She let her scope drift upward, scanning the high ridge above them. There, a shimmer no wider than a coin, heat signature, slight, human. Overwatch. She smiled without humor. Got you. Her breathing slowed until her pulse and the reticle beat together. First shot, the lower shooter folded, quiet as snow. Second shot, the partner didn't flinch, she simply tried to disappear. It didn't help. Riley's second round found her anyway. 2 down. She shifted the scope higher, found the Overwatch nest. 2 figures, prone, professional. They hadn't panicked. That was the problem with training. It teaches you to die correctly. She adjusted elevation, windage, everything by feel. 1 breath in, 1 out. 2 shots, 1 heartbeat apart. The valley echoed once, then went still. 4 kills, 11 seconds. But the silence that followed wasn't relief, it was listening. Riley rolled off the rifle, pulled a small receiver from her vest, and scanned the band their intel team had flagged. Static, then a voice clipped Russian efficient. 1 word. Artemis. Riley froze. She knew that name from reports, the strategist, the ghost behind Valky's eye, a woman who taught snipers how to hunt snipers. Riley whispered into the cold, so you're real. She backed out of the hide, every motion deliberate, unhurried. She left false tracks, broken patterns, anything to confuse whoever was watching. By dawn, she was back at the cabin. She peeled off her gloves, hands trembling only after the rifle was safe. She spread her map again, marked the Overwatch nest, the decoy site, and circled a higher ridge labeled North Spur. That's where command would sit if she were running this hunt. She placed the brass casing beside the map and stared at the phrase again. Hunter's sister. Maybe Artemis hadn't come to kill her. Maybe she'd come to talk. But in this kind of war, talk was just another kind of trigger. Riley picked up the coin, feeling its warmth return. "All right, Dad," she whispered. "Let's see how deep this goes." Outside, fog crawled up from the river like a living thing, wrapping the pines in gray. The mountains were breathing again. The hunt had officially begun. Why did the quiet feel heavier after victory? Riley stared at the 4 red X's she'd drawn on the map, 4 kills in less than 12 hours. On paper, that was a success. In her bones, it felt like a question still waiting for an answer. The wind pressed against the cabin walls, making the rafters creak like old bones. She sat at the table with the radio dark, her rifle clean, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. Outside, the forest wasn't asleep. It was listening. She picked up the brass casing again, the one etched Hunter's sister. The Cyrillic grooves caught the dim light. It wasn't just a taunt. It was personal. Someone out there knew who she was. Someone out there wanted her to know they knew. She turned the casing between her fingers, tracing the scratches as if they were braille. Her father's face came back not as memory, but as a flash. A man sitting cross-legged on the floor of a cabin not unlike this one, whispering to her as a child. The distance between mercy and duty is the length of a trigger pull. Back then she thought it was poetry. Now she understood it was a confession. The radio on the table clicked once. Then again. She froze. No voice, just static, a soft coded rhythm, 2 short bursts, one long, then silence. Morse maybe, but wrong. A pattern made to look familiar but feel off, like a word spelled almost right. She wrote it down anyway. Her translation came out nonsense. Or maybe that was the point. Artemis was talking, but not to her, at least not yet. Riley stood, stretching the ache from her shoulders. The walls felt closer now, the stove louder. She needed air. Outside, night had turned the world to slate and shadow. The snow reflected the moonlight enough to see shapes moving, wind mostly. And yet, not only wind. She raised her scope. On the far ridge something glinted, once, twice, too deliberate for nature. A signal mirror. Her breath fogged the lens. She exhaled slowly and watched the glint appear again, same rhythm as the radio burst. 2 short, 1 long. An invitation. Or a dare. She lowered the scope, jaw tight. Artemis was toying with her, testing distance, patience, maybe character. Riley knew that game, she'd played it herself. But there was something else behind it, something that felt less like intimidation and more like recognition. She whispered to the night, "You're close, aren't you?" The forest didn't answer, but she felt the eyes on her just the same. By morning, the snow had stopped, leaving the mountains silver and quiet. Riley spent the early hours dismantling the enemy's Overwatch site. She worked in silence, gloved hands steady, documenting every angle and mark left behind. The women she'd killed were professionals, every rifle cleaned, every note in their logbook meticulous. She found 1 page written in tight Cyrillic script. She didn't need to translate every word to understand its meaning. Weather reports, shooting adjustments, a list of call signs. And at the top, in faded ink, Artemis command. Below it, 3 names, 2 crossed out in red pencil. 1 left untouched. Petrov E. Riley felt her pulse climb in her throat. The surname wasn't unfamiliar. She'd seen it in her father's declassified loss files. Captain Anton Petrov, the man rumored to have betrayed Daniel Cole's unit. The connection hit like cold iron, impossible but true. She pulled the folded photograph from her pocket, her father, Colonel Harlan, herself as a child. Then she remembered, A woman behind the camera, dark hair, an accent when she laughed. Her mother never said who she was. Petrov. Riley's chest tightened. Was this the same bloodline? Was this war personal in ways no command chain could explain? She called it in. Sentinel Actual, this is Sparrow 1. 4 hostiles neutralized. Found a lead, Petrov's signature, requesting confirmation on any ties between Laos 83 and Valky's I origin. Harlan's reply came slower than usual. Copy Sparrow, stand by. Minutes stretched, then his voice again, lower now. Daniel Cole's final mission in Laos was joint intel with a Russian advisor, Anton Petrov. Operation went black after extraction failed. Files sealed by Joint Command. Riley stared at the map. Petrov's daughter leads Valky's I. That's unconfirmed. It's confirmed, she said. She's out here. She's the one sending the messages. A pause on the line. Then quietly, Riley, if that's true, you're not hunting a terrorist cell. You're walking into a legacy war. Copy that. She clicked off before he could continue. Some wars don't wait for permission. That night, she built a decoy fire 100 yards downhill, feeding it with damp wood so the smoke rose thick and slow, enough to look careless through thermal optics. Then she dug herself a fresh hide halfway up the slope. Let Artemis look at the flame and think she'd gotten sloppy. By 200, the radio crackled again, this time a voice. Female, calm, accent soft but present. You hunt well, sister. Riley's fingers froze above the dial. I see you watching. You move like him, like Daniel. The name landed like shrapnel. She didn't answer. Do you know what he did? The voice continued. Or did they give you the version with medals? Riley exhaled through her nose, steadying the tremor that wanted to become rage. Your father killed mine, the woman said. Laos, 1983. He left me an orphan, but not without purpose. Static hissed, then silence. Riley reached for the transmitter. Her voice came low, level, dangerous. You want to talk about fathers? Come do it face to face. No response, only the soft feedback of someone still listening. She let the radio rest. It wasn't just a game anymore. It was inheritance. By dawn, she'd moved again, east along the ridge, toward the coordinates marked North Spur. Her snowshoes crunched in rhythm with her heartbeat. She carried only essentials: rifle, rangefinder, map, coin. The rest she left behind. A sniper doesn't travel heavy, especially when what's hunting her might be herself. Hours passed without sound. Then faintly, a rustle below, too steady to be animal. Through the scope she caught movement, 2 figures dragging something into cover. She adjusted magnification. One body limp, covered in snow, the other alive, scanning the horizon with surgical precision. Not a rescue, a burial. Riley recognized the discipline. The way the woman checked her flanks, adjusted the tarp, wiped the brass before pocketing it. Every move said the same thing. I've done this before. She almost took the shot, almost. But the hunter in her knew the rhythm of traps. This was too clean, too exposed. She whispered, "You're baiting me." And Artemis, if it was her, didn't move, didn't flinch, just tied the tarp, stood up, and walked into the fog without looking back. The wind shifted again, bringing the smell of oil and metal, a sniper's perfume. Riley held her aim a few seconds longer, then lowered the rifle. If this woman truly was Petrov's daughter, then Riley wasn't here to avenge her father. She was here to finish his unfinished war. Night found her again. The fire in the cabin burned low. She sat by the window, notebook open, writing without knowing why. Her handwriting small, tight, a record for no one. She speaks in code and blood. She knows me before I speak. I can feel her patience through the glass. Her pen hesitated. What if the line between hunter and hunted was drawn by the same man? The thought startled her. not because it sounded poetic, but because it felt true. She remembered the patch from the Valky gear, a silver winter bird perched on a bare branch. She turned it over in her hand. It wasn't just their emblem, it was her father's old call sign, Sparrow 1. Coincidence? No, Artemis was sending her a history lesson. And history had teeth. She cleaned her rifle one last time that night, slow and deliberate, the way a believer might clean an altar. Each motion had rhythm, reverence, resignation. Outside, the fog thickened. The mountains disappeared into themselves. She turned off the lamp, sat in the dark, and whispered to the cold. "You want to make this personal, you already have." The only sound that answered was the soft ticking of the stove cooling down, like a clock counting toward the inevitable. The hunt wasn't about elimination anymore. It was about revelation. And somewhere in the dark, the other sniper, the one called Artemis, was smiling at the same thought. Why did the mountain feel like it was holding its breath? Riley crouched at the edge of the ridge, eyes fixed on the northern slope. The snow below gleamed dull and blue, unbroken except for faint, deliberate disturbances. Not footprints exactly, more like brush marks, smoothed by hands that understood the difference between hiding and erasing. Whoever made them didn't want to disappear. They wanted her to follow. She did. Each step was a conversation with gravity. Each sound had to ask permission to exist. The forest changed as she moved higher, trees thinned, air sharpened, silence grew teeth. By the time the sun broke through the gray, she'd found the place. A slab of granite jutted from the ridge like a stage. Around it, a scatter of shell casings half buried in frost, Russian brass, polished, arranged in a line too neat to be accident. 8 of them. She knelt, brushing snow from the first. The etchings caught the light, Cyrillic letters carved with care. Each casing bore a single word. When translated, they spelled, "Every hunter knows her reflection." A message, personal and cruel in its elegance. Riley's lips parted, but no sound came. She reached for her radio, then stopped. If Artemis wanted her to call for backup, she'd have left something messier: tracks, prints, noise. This wasn't bait for a team. It was a letter for one reader. And she was reading it. She pocketed one casing and stood, scanning the horizon. No movement, no sound, but the feeling, that electric, invisible weight of being watched, pressed against the back of her neck. She didn't raise her rifle. Not yet. She knew how predators worked. The first one to aim was already behind. By mid-afternoon, she'd found shelter, a rock outcrop hollowed by years of wind and rain. From there, she could see 3 valleys, 3 approaches, 3 possible ghosts. The radio stayed silent. Harlan had likely read the silence as bad news. He'd probably already mobilized a drone sweep. But drones couldn't read emotions, couldn't smell deception, couldn't feel the quiet heartbeat of another hunter. Riley could. She studied the terrain until light failed. Then she unrolled her maps again, tracing lines from her father's old mission notes. Laos coordinates, Montana ridges, 2 geographies separated by decades, yet eerily similar in layout. The same tactical philosophy, the same sightlines. It wasn't coincidence. She whispered under her breath, "You built this from his playbook." A crackle came from the radio, faint, almost polite. A voice followed, calm, confident, female. "Not built," it said, "restored." Riley froze. "You're tracing the same routes he used," the voice continued, closer now. "He learned them from mine. The border is never about geography, it's about memory." Riley lifted the radio, thumb hovering over transmit. "You like riddles, Artemis." The voice smiled through static. "Names are for governments. You can call me what he did." Her pulse slowed, and what was that? Sparrow's shadow. The phrase hit like recoil. Her father's call sign had been Sparrow 1. "What do you want?" Riley asked. "To finish what began before we were born." By killing soldiers. By proving that silence is stronger than armies. The line went dead. Riley sat back, the snow creaking under her. For the first time, she wasn't sure whether she was angry or afraid. That night she didn't sleep. She couldn't. The ridge seemed to whisper. Every gust of wind sounded like breath. Every shadow looked like apology. She thought of her father, the photo on the table, his arm around her, that proud, quiet look he'd carried even when the world went wrong. Had he known this day would come? Had he understood that the sins of one generation would script the wars of the next? She pulled the coin from her pocket, pressing it to her palm until it left a mark. "You never told me about her," she whispered. "About them." Outside, snow began again. Soft, heavy flakes that blurred edges and made everything equal. Morning arrived with a different kind of silence. She felt it before she saw it. The forest wasn't waiting anymore. It was ready. When she stepped out, frost cracked beneath her boots. The valley stretched wide below, empty, beautiful, deceitful. Her eyes caught a flicker of motion, not ahead, behind. She turned slow. A silhouette stood at the tree line 50 meters back, still, centered, holding nothing that looked like a weapon. No mask, no rifle, just a woman in winter camo, calm as snow. Riley raised her rifle halfway, not to aim, just to exist in the same vocabulary. The woman's voice carried easily across the cold. "I thought we should see each other before the wind changes." Riley's finger hovered on the trigger guard. "You're real." Artemis, or whoever she was, nodded once. "So are you." Riley's breath clouded. "You killed 89 Americans." "I ended 89 patterns," the woman said quietly. "Machines dressed as men. Don't mistake function for life." Riley's jaw tightened. "You talk like my father used to." "I taught him." The sentence was so simple it almost didn't sound human. Riley's mind rebelled. "You what?" Artemis took one step closer. Not threat, not retreat, just proximity. "Before he wore your uniform, before he chose sides, he trained with us. Sparrow 1, the boy with too much conscience. He learned distance from me." "No," Riley whispered. "Yes," Artemis said, "until the day conscience got in the way of command." Riley's hands were steady, but her voice was, "You're lying." "If I were," Artemis said, "you wouldn't still be holding your breath the way he did when he knew he'd been found." Something inside Riley cracked, not belief, not denial, something older. The woman's eyes were pale gray, the kind of color that refuses to belong to any nation. "What do you want?" Riley asked again. "Truth," Artemis said, "and balance." "You think killing balances anything?" "No," she said, "but being forgotten unbalances everything." She reached into her jacket slowly, deliberate enough for Riley not to fire. From it, she pulled a small pouch. She placed it on a rock halfway between them. "Your father," she said. "He dropped it the day he chose to live instead of finish his mission." Riley's throat tightened. "I don't believe you." Artemis tilted her head. "You will." Riley took a step forward, eyes never leaving the woman's hands. She reached the rock, crouched, picked up the pouch. Inside, a military ID tag. Major Daniel Cole, worn smooth at the edges. Her breath caught. "He told you to breathe between shots," Artemis said softly. "But not to breathe between truths. That was his mistake." Riley looked up. "If you knew him." "I knew what he wanted to be," Artemis interrupted. "A man too moral for espionage, too loyal for politics. He saw beauty in precision. That's why he left. And that's why you came." Riley straightened, pouch in hand. "You're not his teacher. You're his unfinished sentence." A small, sad smile. "Then finish me." Riley's finger found the trigger without thinking. But she couldn't. Not yet. Because beneath the rage was recognition. Not sympathy, something harder to kill. She whispered, "You talk about balance, about patterns. Then answer this, why me?" Artemis looked at her for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet enough to feel like truth. Because you are him, and because I am what he made when he left. The words landed like snow on steel, soft, final, inevitable. Then Artemis turned, stepped backward into fog that had begun to rise like smoke, and was gone. Riley stood there for a long time, rifle at her side, dog tag clenched in her fist. The mountain didn't move. Neither did she. When she finally walked back to the cabin, the wind carried no sound. Only the echo of a woman's voice and the weight of a new question forming beneath her ribs. What if this hunt wasn't about vengeance at all? What if it was about inheritance? The kind you can't refuse because it's written in blood, breath, and the sound of a single shot waiting to be fired. That night Riley sat at the table again, the dog tag beside the coin, two histories touching, neither willing to explain itself. She keyed the radio once, voice barely above a whisper. Sentinel Actual Sparrow 1. Contact confirmed. Leader identified. She claims connection to Daniel Cole. Possible prior mentorship. Recovered personal effects. Standing by. Harlan's reply came strained. You're saying she trained your father. That's what she says. And you believe her. Riley hesitated. Belief isn't part of the job, but she knew things no one else could. Harlan exhaled audibly. Then this just became something else. What? A story that will never make it to the record. Static filled the space between them. Riley looked out the window. The fog had thickened again, swallowing the world in gray. Somewhere out there, a woman was moving through it, one with the same heartbeat, the same silence, the same ghosts. She didn't know how the next encounter would end. But she knew this much. When the shot came, it wouldn't be from hate. It would be from understanding. And that was far more dangerous. Why did truth always sound quieter than lies? Riley sat alone beneath a flickering lantern, the dog tag resting beside her coffee tin, the brass coin beside that, her father's name between two metals that told different stories. The wind clawed against the cabin walls like something trying to get in, or maybe something trying to leave. On the table lay her father's old map, yellowed, creased, the ink faded into veins. She'd stared at it for hours before realizing it wasn't a map of loss at all. Not anymore. The rivers, the ridges, they matched the terrain around her cabin in Montana. He'd redrawn them. Every line, every contour, every coordinate had been rewritten to mirror these mountains, like he'd known she'd find them one day. She whispered to the empty room, "You weren't mapping a place, you were mapping a memory." In the margin, scrawled so faint it nearly disappeared into the paper, were 3 words. Wait for her. Her pulse slowed. Her father hadn't been waiting for extraction. He'd been waiting for Artemis. Riley leaned back in her chair, the truth settling into her bones like a slow bruise. He hadn't been betrayed. He stayed, maybe even chosen to stay. And whatever happened after, whatever the army wrote in its reports, was only half the story. She looked at the radio. For once, she didn't touch it. Some truths weren't ready for witnesses. By morning, the snow had stopped. The sky opened in clear, cruel blue. Riley packed light, rifle, scope, map, rations for 2 days. She left everything else behind, including comfort. The coordinates from her father's map pointed toward a sector 5 clicks east. The terrain was brutal, ice ridges like serrated teeth, wind tunnels that could skin you if you stood too long in the open. Halfway through the climb, she found the sign. A cross, wooden and splintered, leaning crooked against a stone outcrop. The name carved into it was nearly erased by time. She brushed away the snow with her glove until the letters appeared. Cole DM. Her breath hitched. This wasn't a grave, it was a confession. Someone had buried his story here. She knelt. No words, no prayer, just silence. The kind soldiers reserve for things that aren't supposed to exist. Then she saw it, a small tin box wedged beneath the stones. She pried it open. Inside was a cassette tape marked only by a number, 83A. No markings, no label, just time itself locked in plastic. Riley stared at it a long time before slipping it into her pocket. If Artemis wanted balance, this was the scale. Back at the cabin, she found an old field recorder in her gear, analog, stubborn, still running on half a decade of battery life. She slid the tape in, pressed play, and let the ghost speak. A man's voice crackled through, rough, quiet, familiar. "If you're hearing this, then I failed to explain it while I was alive. Maybe I was afraid you'd understand." Riley froze. Her father's voice continued, the static softening around his words. "They told me to eliminate her. They said she was a threat to Western intelligence, but she wasn't the monster they painted. She was precision and mercy in the same breath. She taught me to see distance as something sacred. I couldn't kill her, Riley. Not because I loved her, though maybe part of me did, but because she reminded me what a human life costs." Silence then. "If she's still alive when you find this, don't repeat my sin. Don't let the uniform decide who deserves to breathe." The tape clicked. Riley sat motionless. The air around her felt suddenly wrong, heavier, like memory was made of iron. Her father hadn't been a hero. He hadn't been a traitor either. He'd simply been a man, one who saw too much, chose mercy, and paid for it. And now, here she was, carrying his ghost in a rifle meant to finish what mercy started. That night she called Harlan. "Sir," she said quietly, "I have something you need to hear." She played the tape through the comm link. When it ended, there was only static for a while. Then Harlan spoke slower, older somehow. "Jesus, Riley, if this goes public, everything changes." "It won't," she said. "It's not for them." "Then who's it for?" She looked out the window at the dark ridge swallowing moonlight. "Her." "Artemis." "Yeah. You're telling me you're going to meet the enemy after what she's done." "She's not the enemy," Riley said softly. "Not anymore." The line went silent. Then Harlan sighed. "Whatever you're planning, you're on your own. Washington already wants this scrubbed if they find out you made contact." "They won't," she said. She shut the radio off before he could argue. Sometimes orders get in the way of peace. By dawn, she was moving again. The trail was fresh, cleaner than any she'd seen, the kind that said, "I'm not hiding anymore." She followed it up the ridge and across a frozen creek, past trees that stood like sentinels in judgment. Halfway through, she stopped. On a nearby rock, etched into frost with a gloved finger, were 3 letters. RC. Her initials. She whispered, "You're close." A voice answered from the fog. "I never left." Riley turned. Artemis stood 10 meters away, unarmed, her coat unbuttoned against the wind. Her face was calm, almost kind, the sort of calm that comes after a lifetime of killing. "You found his grave," she said. Riley nodded. "You buried him." Artemis looked past her toward the mountain. "No, I buried what was left of his choice." Riley's voice was steady. "He spared you." Artemis smiled faintly. "He spared himself." Riley stepped closer. "He said he couldn't kill you because you reminded him what life costs." A pause, then Artemis's tone softened. "And now you know that cost. You feel it every time you breathe." Riley studied her, the woman's scars, the eyes too old for her face. There was beauty there, but not of peace. It was the kind forged by consequence. "I didn't come here to kill you," Riley said. "I know. I came for answers." "Then ask. Why the attacks? Why 89 dead?" Artemis looked down at the snow. "Because they built a machine from the bones of conscience. They called it Sentinel." Riley froze. "That's our program." "It was his idea," Artemis said softly. "Your father's. They twisted it. Turned it into something he couldn't live with. I destroyed it so it wouldn't destroy anyone else. Riley's world tilted. You're saying all of this, the killings, were to erase the program? Artemis met her eyes. To erase the mistake. Riley wanted to argue. She wanted to hate her. But the truth in Artemis's eyes was too steady. She asked quietly, "And what happens now?" Artemis stepped closer, so close that Riley could see the faint tremor in her hands. "Now we decide which ghosts deserve to rest." She held out her gloved hand. Something small and metallic rested in her palm, a single bullet casing, engraved just like before. This one read, "Peace is a distance, not a treaty." Riley took it. The cold metal felt heavier than any weapon she'd ever carried. "You can end this," Artemis said, "either way." The meaning was clear. One bullet, two fates. Riley turned the casing in her fingers, her father's voice echoing again. One breath, one shot. Only now she understood what he'd really meant. One breath to choose who you are, one shot to live with it. She lowered her rifle. "I'm done shooting ghosts," she said. For a moment, Artemis just looked at her. Then she nodded once, not approval, not forgiveness, just recognition. She turned and began to walk away, her silhouette fading into the white. Riley called out, "Where will you go?" Artemis didn't look back, where no one remembers names. And then she was gone. Riley stood alone, the mountain swallowing sound, the wind whispering secrets she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. She looked at the casing in her hand. Peace is a distance, not a treaty. She closed her fist around it. Maybe that was the lesson her father had left for both of them. Not victory, not vengeance. Just distance, the space between what you lose and what you become. Why did coming home feel more dangerous than the mountains? The helicopter skimmed low over the frozen valley, blades tearing through fog that refused to let go. Riley sat near the open door, face half hidden beneath her hood. The mountains shrank below, white ridges fading into cloud like they were already erasing her presence. No debrief waited for her out there, just wind, silence, and a choice she hadn't made. But Washington demanded answers, and silence was never on the list. Task Force Sentinel headquarters looked the same: glass, steel, and the illusion of control. Yet walking through its corridors felt different now. Every fluorescent light hummed too loud. Every soldier's glance lingered too long. Word had traveled. She passed the observation deck, where technicians monitored satellite feeds. One screen still displayed the Montana ridgeline, the coordinates blurred out, classified. The caption read, "Operation TERMINATED." Terminated, as if truth were a virus they could delete. In the briefing room, Colonel Harlan stood waiting. His uniform was pressed, his eyes sleepless. A man balancing patriotism and exhaustion on the same blade. He gestured toward the chair. "Sit down, Riley." She didn't. He sighed. "They've reviewed your field report, the tape, everything." "They," she repeated quietly. "That the brass or the ghosts?" "Both," he said, "and neither of them want this story breathing." She folded her arms. "So the official record will say what? That I neutralized a hostile cell and recovered sensitive materials." "That you completed the mission," Harlan said. "Clean, efficient, contained." Riley's eyes narrowed. "And Artemis?" He didn't answer right away. "Disavowed, non-existent." "Meaning alive?" "Meaning she never happened," he said firmly. The silence between them grew thick, brittle. Riley looked at the folder on his desk, stamped classified in red, her father's name printed along the margin. "You're burying him again," she said. Harlan's jaw tightened. "I'm protecting what's left of him, of you." She stepped closer. "By erasing him. By keeping you breathing." Riley shook her head slowly. "He wanted peace, Marcus. You're turning it into paperwork." His gaze softened, not pity, just recognition. "You think I do know? I trained beside him. I watched him break trying to serve two truths at once. Don't let the same thing eat you. I'm not him. No, Harlan said quietly. You're worse, because you still believe honesty can save anyone. For a moment, neither spoke. Only the low hum of the building filled the air. Finally, Riley said, so what happens now? You go dark, Harlan replied. Take the commendation, keep your mouth shut, let this die quietly. And if I do? He met her eyes. Then they'll kill the story and you with it. She left without another word. Outside, the corridors blurred into noise, officers passing, phones ringing, the machinery of order grinding on. She walked straight through it, past the salute of a young private who didn't know what ghosts looked like in daylight. In the locker room, she opened her gear case. The rifle lay inside, disassembled, clean, soulless. She ran a hand along the barrel, remembering Artemis's words, peace is a distance, not a treaty. She packed it away and pulled out the brass casing, the one Artemis had given her. She set it on the bench beside her badge. One symbol of truth, one of obedience. Only one of them still meant something. Later, she found herself on the roof. The city stretched below, pentagon lights, endless movement, people who would never know how close the world had come to breaking over a secret buried in snow. The night smelled like rain and jet fuel. She pulled out the dog tag again. The edges had warmed from her hand, as if her father's name could still carry body heat. You knew they'd do this, she whispered. You knew they'd choose silence. A voice behind her answered, they always do. She turned. Harlan stood in the doorway, coat over his shoulders, eyes tired but calm. He walked closer, hands empty. You think I like this any more than you do? Then stop it, she said. Tell them the truth. And watch everything we built collapse. The program, the trust, the lives it still protects. Maybe they deserve to know what they're dying for. He shook his head. No one wins with that kind of honesty. Riley stared at the skyline, red lights blinking in the distance, aircraft cutting invisible paths through the dark. You ever wonder, she asked, how many wars are still going on just because someone kept a file closed? All the time, he said. They stood there in silence, the kind that doesn't need permission. Then Harlan said softly, there's one thing they didn't classify. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. Inside, a folded slip of paper, coordinates printed in faded ink. Riley looked up. He said, your father wanted those burned. I didn't. What are they? His real mission, Harlan said. Before everything turned, he asked me to give them to you if this day ever came. Why now? Because I think you already know what you're supposed to do. Riley's voice dropped. They'll come after me if I leave. They already are. He turned and walked back toward the stairwell. Before disappearing, he added, sometimes silence needs an exit wound. By dawn, she was gone. No orders, no escort, just a single duffel bag and a compass that didn't point north anymore. The coordinates led west, deep into country so empty even satellites forgot it. Desert stretched for miles, red earth bleeding into horizon. She drove until the fuel gauge kissed empty, then she walked. Hours later, she found it an abandoned relay outpost, half swallowed by sand. The walls were scorched, the antennas bent. Inside, dust hung like smoke. On a rusted table sat a box marked in Russian and English. Joint Training, 1983. Inside the box, files, photos, a single reel of microfilm, and a note written in her father's handwriting. Truth isn't destroyed by silence, it's delayed. She sat there for a long time, the desert wind pushing through broken windows, carrying with it the faint echo of a memory, a gunshot, a lesson, a promise. When she finally spoke, it wasn't to anyone but the dust. They'll bury this too. But even as she said it, she slid the note into her jacket. Some truths don't need audiences. They just need witnesses. Night came fast in the desert. Stars ignited across the horizon, cold, brilliant, indifferent. Riley built a small fire, not for warmth but for ritual. She held the microfilm above the flames, hesitating. Then she stopped. Instead, she placed it back in the box and buried it beneath a cairn of stones. She whispered, "Some ghosts deserve a grave, some stories don't." The wind carried the ashes of the match into the darkness. For the first time in years, she didn't feel watched. Only weightless. Back in Washington, the file on Sergeant Riley Cole was stamped inactive. Officially retired, medically reassigned. Unofficially vanished. But in certain corners of the intelligence world, her name still whispered through encrypted channels. Some said she'd gone rogue. Some said she'd joined the woman she was sent to kill. No one knew the truth. And that was exactly how she wanted it. Somewhere beyond the desert, beneath a sky without sound, a single brass coin caught moonlight beside a rifle cleaned one last time. Riley closed her eyes, letting the wind brush her face like forgiveness. Her father's voice echoed faintly, not command, not memory, just peace. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She smiled once barely. Then she walked into the dark. Why do legends always begin with the wrong ending? 6 months after Sergeant Riley Cole vanished, the official narrative was tidy enough for a press conference. Mission concluded, operative reassigned. Nothing more, nothing less. But rumors have a way of refusing to salute. Whispers circulated through the ranks of a sniper who walked away from the war, of a buried truth no one dared exhume. In the field, her old call sign, Sparrow 1, resurfaced on intercepted frequencies. The analysts called it interference. The old hands called it a ghost. And in a small border town between Montana and the Yukon, a woman matching her description rented a cabin near a frozen lake, paid in cash, no last name. The locals saw her at dawn sometimes, standing by the water's edge, unmoving, as if waiting for a reflection that wasn't hers. They didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer answers. 3,000 miles away, in a safe house buried beneath false passports and recycled cover stories, Artemis listened to the same rumor play through encrypted chatter. Cole sighted, Northwest Sector. She smiled faintly, her hair shorter now, streaked with gray. The years hadn't softened her, but they'd removed everything unnecessary like fear. On the table before her sat two objects, a broken compass and a photo of Daniel Cole. She traced his face with her fingertip. "Your daughter walks your circle," she murmured, "but maybe she'll finish it differently." Outside, rain tapped against the old tin roof. She adjusted the radio dial and caught a fragment of Morse, one long, two short. Her smile faded. That was Sparrow's code. So the legend wasn't rumor, it was signal. Back in Montana, Riley kept her days quiet. She hunted, repaired rifles for local rangers, and avoided questions about where she'd learned to move like that. At night, she'd sit by the window, listening to static on an old shortwave radio. Most nights it was nothing, white noise, distance. But sometimes, faintly, the static pulsed with a rhythm she recognized. One long, two short. The same code Artemis had used. She tried to ignore it at first, but silence, once broken, never stays loyal. On the 7th night, she finally answered. 3 short bursts. Then she waited. A reply came almost immediately. "Meet me where the sky forgets the ground." It was Artemis's way of saying, the plateau. Riley looked at the frozen lake outside her window, the reflection of stars on its surface so perfect it was hard to tell which was sky and which was mirror. The message wasn't poetic, it was precise. She whispered, "You always did know how to find me." The hike to the plateau took half a day. The snow had melted just enough to make the climb harder, wet soil giving underfoot, old ice snapping like glass beneath the weight of choice. She carried no rifle this time. Only her father's coin, her compass, and the brass casing Artemis had given her. Peace is a distance, not a treaty. When she reached the top, the view stole what little breath she had left. Below her, the world stretched infinite, forest, lake, horizon, all dissolving into one color. And standing near the edge, framed by sky, was Artemis. No rifle, no camouflage, just a woman in a dark coat, hands bare, hair whipped by wind that didn't belong to either of them. Riley walked forward until their eyes met. "Been a long time," she said. Artemis smiled faintly. "Time behaves strangely when no one's watching. I wasn't sure if you were alive. Death is overrated." They stood there for a while, two silhouettes against a world too wide for conversation. Finally, Riley asked, "Why call me back?" Artemis nodded toward the horizon. "Because silence doesn't end by itself. It needs a listener." Riley's jaw tightened. "If this is about the past—" "It's about inheritance," Artemis interrupted. "You buried his truth. I buried his guilt. Now we decide which one survives us." Riley pulled the brass casing from her pocket. "You gave me this. Peace is a distance, not a treaty. I thought you meant the distance between us." Artemis shook her head. "No, between who we were and who we became to survive it." The wind rose, sharp and cold. Riley's hand closed around the casing. "He could have stopped it. He could have told someone." "He did," Artemis said. "He told you that's why you're here." Riley looked down at the snow. "He didn't leave instructions." "He didn't need to." Riley's eyes met hers. "You loved him." "Love was the wrong word for what we shared," Artemis said softly. "He understood me. That's rarer than love." "And me," Riley asked quietly, "what am I to you?" Artemis took a long breath, the proof that understanding survives bloodlines. Something shifted in Riley's chest, not forgiveness but fatigue, the kind that lives beneath forgiveness. She stepped closer. "You're not here to make peace." "No," Artemis said, "I'm here to return it." She held out a small item, another coin, almost identical to Riley's, except tarnished and bent. "I took it from him the day he spared me," she said. "I thought it would remind me of debt. It reminded me of mercy instead." Riley reached out, took the coin. Their fingers brushed, brief, human, unguarded. "You could have killed me months ago," Riley said. "I still could. So why didn't you?" Artemis looked out over the valley. "Because the world doesn't need another ghost, it needs a witness." Riley pocketed the coin. "You're running again." "Not running," Artemis said, "ending." Riley frowned. "What do you mean?" Artemis turned to her fully, eyes bright against the cold. "There's one last operation file still active. Sentinel wants me erased. I can't hide forever, but I can choose how the story ends." "No," Riley said immediately, "that's not your call." "Everything we've done," Artemis said, "was about control. For once, let choice be the weapon." Riley shook her head. "I won't pull the trigger." Artemis smiled sadly. "I didn't ask you to." She reached into her coat, pulled out a small transmitter and crushed it underfoot. The sound echoed like a shot. "They'll be here in an hour," Artemis said. "Satellites, drones, everything. They'll come for both of us." Riley stepped forward. "Then we leave together." Artemis studied her almost tenderly. "You really are his daughter. You think I'd let them erase you?" Artemis's eyes softened. "No, I think you'll understand why I can't let them erase you." Before Riley could respond, Artemis pressed something into her hand, a flash drive, wrapped in tape. "What's this?" "The truth," Artemis said. "The full record. Your father's files, the training logs, the real Sentinel directives, everything they buried." Riley's fingers closed around it. "Why give this to me?" "Because they'll believe you, not me." The wind whipped harder now, carrying snow sideways. Riley reached out. "Artemis." But the woman stepped back toward the ridge. "If you want to honor him," Artemis said softly, "don't shoot, don't hide, just tell it right." Riley's voice cracked. "You don't have to do this." Artemis smiled once faintly. "I already did." Then she stepped backward, 1, 2, 3 paces, and disappeared into the white. No scream, no sound. Only silence, falling heavier than snow. Riley dropped to her knees, the flash drive burning against her palm. "Damn it," she shouted into the wind, but the mountain didn't echo. It swallowed. When the search drones arrived hours later, they found only her tracks. No second set, no body, just a small indentation near the ridge and 2 brass coins lying side by side. She pocketed both. Back at her cabin that night, she sat before the fire, holding the drive between her fingers. She could end everything with one upload, expose Sentinel, her father, the entire operation. But she remembered Harlan's words, "Sometimes silence needs an exit wound." And maybe, she thought, the wound was already open. She placed the drive in an old ammo box, beside the other artifacts of truth, the map, the dog tag, the 2 coins. She sealed it shut. Then she looked out across the frozen lake, where dawn was beginning to bleed into the horizon. The world for once felt still. Her father's voice came back, a whisper she didn't know she remembered. "If you ever have to choose between justice and mercy, shoot wide." She smiled faintly. "I did." In the morning she'd be gone again, maybe to another name, maybe to another silence. But tonight, for the first time, she let herself rest. The hunter had finally stopped hunting. Because sometimes the only way to win is to stop aiming. Why does peace always arrive wearing the face of loss? Months passed after the plateau. Seasons changed, but the mountains kept their secrets. To the world, Sergeant Riley Cole was still a file, one more classified disappearance folded between lies and logistics. But in quiet corners, whispers endured. Hunters spoke her name as myth. Analysts heard her voice in intercepted transmissions and called it residual echo. And somewhere in Montana, the woman behind the echo watched the lake thaw. She spent her days rebuilding things that didn't need rebuilding. Rifles for rangers, radios for miners, a leaking roof that would leak again. Her nights she spent staring at a sealed ammunition box beside the fireplace. Inside lay the flash drive, the map, the coins, the truth. She told herself she'd forgotten the code to the lock. But some nights, when the wind pressed against the windows just right, she'd hear a faint click, like temptation knocking. One morning, the knock came for real. A black SUV crawled up the dirt road, tires chewing gravel. A man stepped out, older, slower, still built like command. Colonel Marcus Harlan. He didn't salute, she didn't stand. "Couldn't leave it alone, could you?" she said, half a smile, half a wound. He looked around the cabin, the rifle parts, the coffee tin burned black from too many uses. "You've been hard to find. You taught me how." He stepped closer, his voice gentler. "You disappeared with the evidence, Riley. Washington thinks you're a liability." She nodded toward the mountains. "They can have what's left of me if they can find it." He studied her face, seeing what the reports couldn't describe, calm without peace, stillness without rest. "What happened to her?" he asked quietly. Riley met his eyes. She made a choice. "Alive. Does it matter?" He didn't answer. Some truths are mercy disguised as silence. Finally, he said, "There's talk of reopening Sentinel. Different name, same machinery. If they do, this all starts again." Riley looked at the ammo box. The flash drive inside seemed to hum with memory. "You came to take it." "No," he said. "I came to ask what you're going to do with it." She smiled faintly. "You always were good at outsourcing conscience." He almost laughed. "I'm too old for rebellion, Riley." She walked to the window, looking out at the lake. Its surface was still half frozen, 2 realities coexisting. "If I release it, everything burns. If I don't, it all happens again." He said nothing. After a long pause, she added, "You ever wonder if truth's just another weapon, one no one's trained to carry?" He sighed. "That's the only kind we ever built." When he left, he didn't look back. Commanders rarely do. But before he closed the door, he said quietly, "Whatever you decide, decide as a soldier, not as a ghost." That night, Riley sat before the fire, the box in her lap. The lock clicked open like it had been waiting for permission. She placed each item on the floor: the map, the dog tag, the 2 coins, the brass casing, the flash drive. The artifacts of 3 lives knotted into one. Her father's voice filled the silence inside her. "The distance between mercy and duty is the length of a trigger pull." She whispered, "Then maybe peace is what happens when you stop pulling." She powered up her old laptop. No network, no connection, just enough circuitry to awaken the ghosts. The files opened one by one. Mission logs, surveillance photos, memos signed by generals long retired. Names, operations, betrayals, all laid bare. It wasn't just a secret. It was a mirror reflecting every war that pretended to be righteous. She watched until the screen went dark from inactivity, as if the truth itself was exhausted. Then she took the flash drive out, wrapped it in cloth, and placed it beside her father's coin. "Dad," she whispered, "you ran from the lie. I'm just walking past it." Dawn came slow, painting the snow in colors too gentle for a battlefield. She loaded the truck, packed what little she owned. No rifle this time, only the box and a folded note. As the engine rumbled to life, she looked once more at the cabin. For years it had been her refuge, her punishment, her listening post. Now it was just wood and memory. She drove south until the road ended in dust. Then she buried the box beneath a cedar tree overlooking the valley. Over it, she placed a flat stone and pressed the dog tag into its surface until the letters D.M. Cole shone in the early light. No prayer, no salute, just a soldier returning what the world never earned, the right to rest. 3 weeks later, an anonymous package arrived at a newspaper in D.C. No sender, no note, just a single USB stick and a message typed on plain paper. "History doesn't belong to the victorious." By the time the editors decrypted it, the data had already been copied to dozens of servers around the world. The Sentinel files went public. Headlines burned through every channel: covert programs, illegal operations, disavowed missions. The press called it the Sparrow Leak. And somewhere far from the noise, a woman watched the news on a cracked television in a roadside diner. When they showed her father's photo, she turned the volume down. When they showed hers, she turned it off. She left cash on the counter, slipped out quietly, and drove into the sunset without looking back. Months later, in a coastal village no map cared about, a figure appeared at the edge of a shooting range built for tourists. Locals said she trained volunteers there, rangers, farmers, anyone who wanted to learn patience. They called her Riley, but no one used a last name. On clear mornings, she'd line up coins on the fence posts, half a mile out, and tell the students, "Don't shoot at them. Just breathe until you understand why you wanted to." Most never asked what that meant. A few did. She always answered the same way. Because once you pull the trigger, you can't hear the wind anymore. One evening, as the sun bled into the ocean, she found a letter tucked under the range gate. No address, no seal, just her name. Inside was a photograph, grainy, old, taken decades earlier. 2 young soldiers, a man and a woman, standing beside a helicopter, her father and Artemis. On the back, a single sentence written in Russian: "Balance achieved." Riley closed her eyes, letting the words settle like dust. For the first time in years, she felt something unclench inside her. Not triumph, not closure, just quiet. She burned the letter gently, watching the paper curl, the ash drift toward the sea. Then she whispered, "Thank you." To whom she wasn't sure, maybe to both, maybe to neither. Later that night, she sat on the sand, the brass coin glinting beside her. The tide crept close enough to kiss her boots. She thought about her father, his voice, his laughter, the mistakes that built her. She thought about Artemis, the enemy who'd turned out to be a teacher. And she thought about the mountain, the snow, the silence that had made her listen again. Her life had been a single long shot, wind, breath, heartbeat, distance. Every correction had cost her something. Now at last, there was nothing left to adjust. She looked at the horizon, where stars met water, and whispered the last line her father never got to finish. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. She let the pause hang, long and tender, before completing it herself. It simply acts. The coin caught the moonlight one last time as the tide rolled in. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of satellites and orders, peace finally exhaled.